Hello everyone, welcome to our new course on Excel for beginners. Excel is an excellent tool for data analysis. However, if it's not used the right way, it can quickly become a nightmare. This course aims to provide you with the skills that make you comfortable and confident in Excel. Let's have a quick look at what we will learn in this course. We will start off by studying Excel's interface and learning some techniques to navigate through the Excel sheets efficiently. In section 2, we will dive into formulas and functions and see how they make our lives easier. Section 3 is about pivot tables, which is a must-know for every Excel user. Next, we will study how to use charts and shapes. Section 6 is where we consolidate all the knowledge gained in previous sections to develop this amazing and eye-catching dashboard. Throughout this course, I will share with you gems of tips and tricks to set you up for success in your Excel journey. With that, I hope you're excited, and let's jump right into it. We will start with the basics. In this section, we will get some familiarity with Excel's ribbon and user interface. Then we will learn how to navigate between worksheets, workbooks, and cells in an efficient way. And lastly, we will look into some basic formatting commands. If you already have some experience with Excel and are comfortable with these areas, feel free to skip to the next section on formulas and functions. If you're relatively new to Excel, I encourage you to stick around. We will learn some important tips and tricks to help you later in the course. Let's open a new Excel workbook. At the top, you have a ribbon which contains several tabs. The Home tab has options for formatting and editing your spreadsheet. The Insert tab has commands related to adding shapes, tables, and other objects. The Draw tab can help you draw custom shapes. The Page Layout tab is helpful when you want to print worksheets or set up the theme of your workbook. The Formulas tab has library of functions that you can use in your spreadsheet. Then we have the Data tab. This tab has options related to Power Query, importing data from other sources, sorting and filtering data, etc. Next is the Review tab, which helps proof and protect your workbook or worksheets. The View tab can be used when you want to change the display of your worksheet. And the Help tab has links to online help. Right under the ribbon, you have a formula bar where you can see any formulas that you type in. At the bottom left, you can see the list of worksheets in your workbook. When you launch a new instance of Excel, a workbook opens up with only one sheet called Sheet 1. You can double-click on the sheet name to rename it. You can also create a copy of the sheet. Just right-click on the sheet and click Move or Copy. Then select Move to End and then check on the Create a Copy. Click on OK and it will create a copy for you. You can have several worksheets in your workbook. Each worksheet has around 16,000 columns and approximately 1 million rows. The intersection of column and row is called a cell. Each cell has an address, defined by the column name of the cell, followed by the row number. For example, my current cell has an address of E6. The address of your active cell will appear in the address bar located just next to the formula bar. You can store a value inside a cell just by typing in what you want to store. For example, I will assign the value of a skillnator to this cell. Similarly, I can type in any number. For example, I will type in 4 to assign it a value of 4. But this isn't the only way to assign a value to a cell. You can assign a value by typing in a formula as well. If I type 2 plus 3, the cell will acquire a value of 5. In the next section, we will learn in more detail about formulas and functions. Next, we will learn about navigation. Go ahead and open the Superstore dataset file. I will provide the link to these files in the description of the video. Now let's face it, Excel worksheets are huge. Take an example of this dataset. This table has close to 10,000 rows. Now let's say I want to go to the last row of this table. If I scroll down manually, that will take forever. A faster way is to hold the Control key on your keyboard and press the down arrow. Likewise, if you're at the bottom of the table and want to go all the way up, hold the Control key again and press the up arrow key. Similarly, you can navigate between left and right corners of the table. Now let's say you want to select the entire first row of this table. You have two options here. So you can select the first cell in the row, which is cell A2, hold the Shift key on your keyboard, and then select the last cell, which is cell U2. Alternatively, and a better method will be to select cell A2, press and hold both Ctrl and Shift keys on your keyboard and press the right arrow key. As you progress in your Excel journey, you will get to work with large and complex spreadsheets. Therefore, it's essential that you have good grip on navigation. This will help you work fast and smoothly. Now we will learn about the formatting options. Home tab is where you will have most of the formatting commands. The first section on the Home tab has commands related to clipboard, for example, copy, cut, and paste. Next, you have commands related to font. Let's say I want to change the font of my first row in the table. I will first select the entire row by pressing Ctrl Shift and then pressing the right arrow. Then I will do the formatting of my choice. So I want to make it bold. I want to increase the font size. Let's say I want to change font as well, and I want to give it a background color of yellow. If I want to revert back, I can press Ctrl Z. It will undo the formatting one by one. If I want to redo it, I can press Ctrl Y on my keyboard. All of these commands can also be executed by using keyboard shortcuts. For example, if I want to make the font italic, I can press Alt H2 on my keyboard. Now there are so many commands and you might be wondering how can someone remember all of these shortcuts. The good news is that you don't have to. You can use Excel's guidance to gauge which shortcut you need to use in a particular situation. You can do this by using the Alt key. When you press the Alt key and release it, Excel will show you options for the next key to press. Let's assume you want to navigate to the Home tab. You will press H. Excel will now give you options for the following keys and their individual actions. Let's say I want to underline my text. To do that, I will need to press number 3 on my keyboard, as I can see from the guidance Excel is providing. I will press 3 and then I have options for single or double underline. I will press D to go with the double underline, and you will see that my text will now have a double underline formatting. Next on the ribbon we have options for text alignment, and after that we have number formatting. Then we have the styles section. This has options for conditional formatting and tables. Then we have options to insert cell. Let's say I want to insert a new column between column L and column K. I'll select column L, then go to insert, and I'll say insert cells, and it will insert a new column. Under the format button, you have options to play with the column width or row height. An important feature here is the auto-fit column width. Have a look at column N in my table. This column is not wide enough to accommodate all the data. To fix this, you can select the entire column, then you can either go to the format and select auto-fit from there, or press the keyboard shortcut Alt HOI. And this will extend your column so much that it accommodates all the values. One last thing which I wanted to cover is paste to special. This is something you will use very often in your Excel journey. Let's say I'm happy with the formatting of first row and I want to apply the same formatting to row number 7. This can be achieved via the paste special option. First, I will select row number 1 and copy it. Then I will go to the 7th row. Here, I can either press keyboard shortcut Alt ESV or select paste to special from the Home tab. Once I do that, I will get this window which will ask what elements do we want to be pasted. For example, formulas, formats, column widths. There are several options. I will select formats and click on OK, and there we go. Now you can see only the formatting of row number 1 has been copied, but not the contents. These were some of the most important and commonly used formatting commands. As you can see, there are many other options available in the ribbon. I suggest you play around with them and see what each of them does. This will give you a good hands-on practice. In the next section, we will learn about formulas and functions. I have the Superstore dataset file open again. Let's start with writing some basic formulas. I have a number here in cell U2. Let's assume I want to add 10 to this number and get the answer in cell W2. I will write a formula by putting in an equal sign. Then I will give reference to cell U2 followed by a plus sign and then the number 10. Once I press enter, I will get 51. Now let's say I want to add 10 to all the numbers in column U and get the answers in column W. For that, I don't need to write all the formulas again. I can copy the formula I already wrote in cell W2 by pressing Ctrl C and paste it in the rest of the cells in column W by pressing Ctrl V. Although in cell W2, when I wrote the original formula, I had specified cell U2 inside of the formula. When I copied this formula to cell W3, Excel has picked up cell U3 in the formula instead of cell U2. And the same is true for rest of the cells, as you can see from the numbers. This is called relative referencing, where when you copy a formula from one cell to another, any reference to another cell in that formula also moves. Now let's assume you want to see the sum of cell U2 and 10 such that all the formulas in column W are referring to the cell U2. This can be achieved by placing a $sign before the cell which you want to keep static. In this example, I will put a $sign before U and another $sign before 2. When I copy this formula, you will see that reference to cell U2 will not move. This is called absolute referencing. You will spend a lot of time copying and pasting formulas. Therefore, having a good understanding of this concept is crucial. Absolute referencing can also be applied only to columns or only to rows. Let's understand it with the help of an example. In the current situation, the entire cell U2 has been set up as an absolute reference. Therefore, no matter where I copy this formula in this worksheet, the formula will always refer to cell U2. There might be situations where I would want the row number of the reference cell to be dynamic, but the column reference to be static. I can do that by keeping a $sign before the column portion of the cell address, that is, keeping the $sign before U, but removing the $sign before the row number. Now, if I copy this formula down, it will refer to the new rows, that is, row reference will change, but if I copy this formula towards the right, the column reference will not change as it's set as absolute. Likewise, you can have dynamic reference to the column number and absolute reference to the row number as well. You will just need to switch the $sign. Next, we will talk about functions. Functions are predefined formulas that take in certain values called arguments and perform some mathematical operation on those arguments. For example, there is a function called sum. It takes in one or more numbers as arguments. If this function is provided with two or more numbers, it will simply add them up and give you an answer. Functions in Excel are broadly categorized in 5 types, which are here. There are close to around 300 functions in Excel, and it's difficult to cover each of them. Therefore, I will be touching upon some of the most important and commonly used ones in this course. The purpose of this section is to give you awareness of how functions can help you save time and where they are most applicable. Provide you an understanding of how to write functions or decipher the ones someone else has written, and how to search for the right function to help you solve the problem at hand. We will start with the statistical functions. Within the statistical function, let's kick off with the sum function. The sum function is very simple. It just adds up all the values that you pass into this function. Let's say I want to find the sum of total sales. I will write in an equal to sign followed by the sum, then I'll open a bracket and provide the range of cells that contain sales values. Then I will put in a closing bracket. Once I press enter, I will get the sum of sales. Since we are just starting to work on functions, let me touch up quickly on some basics. When writing any function, you need to start with an equal sign. If you omit the equal to sign, Excel will assume you're just writing some plain text. Secondly, after the equal to sign, when you start writing down the function name, you will notice that Excel's IntelliSense will give guidance regarding the functions available. In addition to that, I will also get a box next to the function name which shows briefly what each of the function does. To select a function of your choice, you can either double-click on the function name or press the Tab key on your keyboard. Once you do that, Excel will show guidance regarding what arguments are required for the function to work correctly. For example, when I select the sum function, it's asking for number 1, number 2, and so on, because the sum function needs at least 2 or more numbers to add them together. Now let's explore the count function. This function counts the number of cells that contain numerical values. I will put in an equal sign, then write count, open a bracket, and pass in the same range which we did with sum formula, that is from cell M2 to M31. And we get an answer of 30. Now let's modify the range. Instead of starting at cell M2, I will start my range at cell M1. Should we get 30 or 31 as an answer? We still get 30. This is because if you see the definition, the count function only counts the numerical values. Cell M1 has a string value or a text value, and therefore the count function ignores it. If you want to count all the values, there is a function called count A. Let's try it out. And there you go, we get 31. Now let's look into some more advanced statistical functions. I have created some examples on the right that will help us understand these functions better. Let's assume you want to find out the total sales for the furniture category. If you use the sum formula and add each and every cell for the furniture category one by one, that will take forever. Therefore, Excel provides us with a SUMIF function. This function helps us add the numbers provided they meet a specified criteria. Let's select the SUMIF function and look at Excel's IntelliSense to see what arguments are required to execute it. It's asking for a range, criteria, and sum range. So what are these arguments? Basically, Excel is asking us what values do we want to add. We will say that we want to add the sales values, that is, values in the column L of our data. Therefore, in this case, column M becomes our sum range. Next, Excel is saying, what values should I add? Should I add the entire column, or is there any criteria? Well, our answer is yes, please only add the values for the furniture category. Therefore, furniture is the criteria in this case. Last question Excel is wondering about is that how do I know which values in column M are related to furniture and which are not? Well, we will say have a look at column J. Whichever rows in column J have furniture, those rows in column M have numbers for furniture. Therefore, in this case, column J becomes the range or the criteria range for this example. The IntelliSense of the SUMIF function doesn't explicitly call it a criteria range. It says only range. That's why it could be sometimes confusing. But remember, the first argument here is the criteria range. So let's provide in these values. And there we go, we have got the sales for the furniture category only. Let's say I want to find the total sales for office supplies and technology as well. I will copy the formula down for that. Can you spot what's wrong with this formula? If I deep dive into the formula by pressing F2 key, or you can also just double click the cell, you will see the criteria range and sum ranges have moved. This is because we kept them as relative reference. To fix this problem, I will put them as an absolute reference. Now if I copy the formulas down, they should work fine. A watch out with the SUMIF function is that the criteria range and sum range should always be of the same size. If you provide ranges of different sizes, then this could lead to errors. For practice, I suggest you to solve the next two challenges yourself. They're pretty much the same. Instead of category, you need to find summary by region and segment. A variation of SUMIF function is the COUNTIF function. As you might have guessed, COUNTIF function will count the number of cells in the given range that meet a certain criteria. Let's say I want to find the count of orders for each region. Assume that each line in this dataset indicates a separate order, which means that we need to count the number of times each region appears in this data. I will put the COUNTIF function. It's asking for only two arguments, that is the range and criteria. For range, I will put a reference to column I because that column has the region names. In the criteria, I will give reference to the region names. I will make the formula references absolute and paste them down. For the next exercise, we need to find the value of the biggest number in the sales column. To solve this, I will use a function called max. This function returns the largest value from the given range. And for the next step, we can use the min formula, which finds the smallest value in a given range. Moving on, let's work on slightly more complicated problem. Here, I want to sum the numbers provided two criteria are met. For example, I want to find the total sales for the furniture category in the South region. For this situation, I can use SUMIF function. This function requires a sum range, a criteria range, and a criteria, and you can provide in multiple criteria in this function. For sum range, I will provide column L. For criteria range 1, I will give column J because that has categories. Then I will give reference to cell W4 because that has the category name, which is furniture. Next, I need to put in criteria range 2, for which I will select column I. followed by criteria 2, which is the South region. And there we go, we've got the answer. With that, I believe you will have a good idea of how functions can help you work efficiently. Imagine if you had done all of these analyses manually. That would have been a nightmare. With functions, you can save a lot of hard work and solve problems quickly. Building on that note, there are lots of statistical functions available in Excel. To see a list of functions, you can go to the Formulas tab and click on the Stat Functions. If you want, you can try some of these out. If you get stuck, just write the function name and press F1 on your keyboard. That will open the Help pane and it will show you via an example how you can use that specific function. Also, there are various websites from where you can find Excel formulas and function exercises. I have shared a link to one of the websites which I found useful in the description of this video. In the next section, we will cover date and time functions. One of the great things about Excel is that you can perform some mathematical operations on date values. Here in this dataset, I have order dates in column B. If I want to find out the date after 4 days of order date, I can simply add 4 to it, and that should give me the answer date. To make these dates more readable, I will select the entire column, go to number formatting, and select long date. Then I can do the same for column J by pressing Ctrl Y. Next, we will look into the eDate function. eDate function will give you the date after the specified number of months. Let's say our order date is November 8, 2016, and I want to have the date of 2 months down the line in column K. In this case, yes, one approach is to just add 60 days into the order date to get the answer. But you never know whether you should add 60 or 61 because there could also be a month of 31 days in between. In such situations, eDate function can be very helpful. Excel will itself take care of adding the right number of days. eDate function will ask for only 2 arguments, that is start date and the number of months you want to be added. Next, let's talk about the EO month function. Our order date is November 8th, and let's say I want to find out the end of the month date for this order date. I can do that via the EO month formula. It asks for 2 arguments, that is start date and months. I will put 0 in months and we will get the answer. Here the question is, why would I use a function to calculate it? I mean, I can look at the order date and know that the end of this month will be November 30th. Well, in some cases, you might want to find out how many days before the end of the month you receive the order. And in such cases, this formula can be helpful. Once I have the end of the month dates, I can easily calculate the difference between end of the month and the order date by doing a subtraction. Similar to statistical functions, there are various date-time functions as well in Excel. If you want to learn about date functions in more detail, you can check out my full video on this topic. I will put the link in description. Moving on, we will learn about the text functions. While working in Excel, you might often need to maneuver and play around with the text values. Text functions come in very handy in these situations. Let's take the first example. We have the order ID in the first column of this dataset. Let's say I want to break this down at every instance of the hyphen in the order ID. I can do that via the text split function. As the first argument, this function is asking for the text to be broken down, so I will provide my order ID. The second argument is the delimiter. Here I will write hyphen enclosed in quotation marks, and that will break the order ID down into 3 components. Next, let's talk about concatenate function. Concatenate function lets you combine different pieces of text. In this data set, I have country, city, state, and postal codes in separate columns. If I want to combine them into one cell, I can do that via the concatenate function. As far as arguments are concerned, concatenate function only needs references to the text values that need to be combined. Here, I have combined the values of country, city, state, and postal code into one cell. But if I want these to be separated by space, then I can add spaces enclosed inside quotation marks in the formula like shown here. Note, there are several other ways to achieve the same result, for example by using the text join function or simply by separating these different components of text by an ampersand sign. Next, we will talk about the right and left function. Sometimes you might want to extract certain characters from a text string. Let's say in this example, I want to extract the last 5 digits from my customer ID. I can do that via the right function. This function needs 2 arguments. The first argument is the text from which we want to extract the characters. So I will give the reference to my customer ID. And second is the number of characters that I want to extract. So I will put in 5 and I'll get the answer. Likewise, I can use the left function to extract any number of characters from the left end of my string. Next, we will learn about lookup and reference functions. These functions are helpful in looking up the data from different sources. Let's learn by an example. In this example, I have sales by subcategory, but let's assume we have been asked to produce sales by category summary. To do that, I need a category column in my dataset. Now, if I fill up the category column manually one by one, that can take up forever. A smart way to do this will be to use VLOOKUP function. To use the VLOOKUP function, we first need a mapping table from which our formula is going to pick up the category name. We have this mapping table here on the side. Secondly, there should be at least one common field between the mapping table and our dataset. We have subcategory fields both in our dataset as well as in the mapping table. So that will become the base of our lookup. The VLOOKUP function needs 4 arguments. First is the lookup value. Here, the function is asking us to give reference to the cell in our dataset which has the value for the common field. Therefore, in this case, I will provide reference to the cell containing the subcategory name. Next, it's asking for the table array. Basically, it's asking for the mapping table here. So I will provide reference to column I and J. Note that the first column of the range which you provide for the table array should be the common field. Excel will use the first column of the table array to match values with the lookup value provided in argument 1. Next argument is the column index number. Here, Excel is basically asking for the column number in the mapping table which contains the category field or the field from which we want to bring the values into our dataset. So here the category field is the second column in the mapping table, so I will mention 2. And lastly, it's asking if we want to find exact match or allow approximate matches. I will put in false, so it goes for the exact match. Now I will press enter and voila, we have the category name in our dataset. Now I will put in some absolute references and drag the formula down or copy the formula down to get the category names for the entire dataset. As you can see with this example as well, functions make our life much easier. Had we done this exercise manually, it would have taken a lot of time and effort. The VLOOKUP formula has one drawback, and that is it will not work if the first column of the mapping table or the lookup table is not the common field. Take this example. Here, everything is same to what we saw in the previous problem. Difference is in the mapping table. Here, the mapping table has category in the first column and subcategory in the second column. Since subcategory is the common field and it's not the first column in the mapping table, VLOOKUP will not work here. Let me show you as well. I'll put in the VLOOKUP function, and once I press enter, you can see it has given us an error. In Excel 2019, a new function was introduced called xLookup, which overcomes this drawback. xLookup takes in a minimum of three arguments. First is the lookup value, which stays the same as we did for VLOOKUP function. Next is the lookup array. This is the column in the mapping table that contains the lookup value. Therefore, I will provide reference to column K in this case. And third is the return array, for which I will provide reference to column J because that contains the category values that we want to return. And there we go. Now we can drag this formula and populate the entire column. Moving on, let's talk about the logical functions. These functions will let you build logic into your formulas. Imagine we have this dataset which shows order ID and sales value of each order. If the value of the order is bigger than 500, I want to write yes in column N, otherwise I want to mention no. Now again, imagine if we do this one by one manually for a large dataset, that will not be very efficient. A smarter way will be to use the if function. If function takes in three arguments. First is the logical test, which we want the formula to perform. Here I will mention L2 greater than 500. Second argument is the value we want our function to return if logical test is passed. If the value is greater than 500, I want the function to return yes. And the third argument is the value we want to be returned if the test fails. For this, I will mention no. And there we go. A task which could have taken several minutes is done within a few seconds. Let's practice a few more. In column O, I want to find out if the order is related to the furniture category. I will use the same approach as we did for the first example. The only thing I will change is the logical test. For the logical test, I will put J2 is equal to furniture. And that should give me yes for all the orders of furniture category. The following example is a slightly more complicated one. Here we want to return yes if two logical tests are passed. By default, the if function has only one logical test, but we have other functions that can perform multiple logical tests for us. In this case, we will use the AND function. We can pass in as many logical tests as we want in this function. This function will return true if all the logical tests are passed. So I will take column S as the helper column. I will write the AND function, and inside the brackets, I will provide the two arguments I want my function to evaluate. You will see that the function returns true where both the conditions are met. Now I will go back to column P and put an if statement where I will say if column S is equal to true, then return yes, otherwise no. We saw how AND function returns true if all the logical tests are passed. We have another function called OR, which returns true if any of the logical tests are passed. This can be helpful in situations like our next example, where I want to return yes if the category is either furniture or technology. This time I will use column T as the helper column. I will write OR function, and inside the brackets I will put the two logical tests that I want my function to evaluate. I will enter and copy the formula down. You will see that this function returns true wherever the category is furniture or technology. Now I can go back to column Q, put in an if statement where I will say if column T is true, then return yes, otherwise return no. Before we complete this section on formulas and functions, I want to highlight some important points. There are lots of functions available in Excel. I have covered some of the most important and commonly used ones in this section. The purpose of this section was to give you awareness of how functions can help you save time, and also to give you a bit of an understanding of how you can write their syntaxes. I will encourage you to get some more hands-on practice. You can search for Excel formulas and functions practice on Google, and I'm sure you will get various exercises. I have put a link to one of the sites which I liked in the description of this video. The second important point I would like to mention is that to be a good Excel user, you do not necessarily need to remember all the functions by heart. In fact, to some extent, this is impractical. You need an awareness that functions can help you save time, and a bit of a know-how about how different functions will apply in various situations. For example, if your manager asks you to create a sales summary by region, you should know you can use SUMIF function in this scenario. Now, if you do not recall the exact syntax and arguments of the SUMIF function by heart, that's okay. You can always Google them as and when the situation arises. With that, we will move to our next section, which is about the wonderful world of pivot tables. Pivot tables are an amazing feature of Microsoft Excel. They can help you analyze large datasets very quickly and efficiently. Let's learn via an example. We have this dataset which shows sales of Superstore. Imagine you've been asked by your manager to create a summary of sales by region from this dataset. One way to solve this is to use the SUMIF function, which we saw earlier in section 2, but another option is to use pivot table. To add a pivot table, I will select the entire dataset by pressing Ctrl A, go to the Insert tab and click on Insert Pivot Table. In the dialog box that opens up next, I will select New Worksheet. Once I click OK, I will get an empty pivot table. On the right hand side, I will get a pane called Pivot Fields pane, which can help me create my pivot table. In the upper half of the pane, we have Field List. This is the list of all the fields or columns we had in our dataset. In the bottom half, we have 4 areas of pivot table: rows, columns, filter, and values areas. Let's say we want to set up sales by region table. I can do that by dragging the region field from the field list to the rows area and the sales field to the values area. And there we go, we have the summary ready. Now we could have achieved the same thing by using the SUMIF function. So why put in a pivot table? Reason is pivot tables are more flexible. Let's say your manager changes his mind and he says he wants to see sales by category now. To do that, all I need to do is drag the region field out of the rows area and replace it with a category field. There you go, it's done. If you had used the SUMIF formula here, you will need to reconfigure the formula and pick up the category and so on. So pivot tables are much more adaptable and fast. Now let's say your manager tells you that in addition to category, he wants to see subcategories as well in the same view, then that is also possible. You can drag the subcategory field and put it under the category in the rows area. Therefore, if you have a large data set, or you're working on a report which you would need to update frequently, or you're working on something where you anticipate lots of changes, then you should use a pivot table. On the other hand, if you need to do a quick one-off analysis, then you can use functions. Moving on, let's look at some more cool features of the pivot table. These are some things which are not possible or might be very difficult if done manually via functions. First, I will change the layout of my pivot table. With the pivot table selected, I'll go to the Design tab, click on the report layout and select Compact Layout. This will make our report a little bit cleaner. Now, let's say your manager wants to see the sales broken down by year and he wants to see this data only for the consumer segment. To do that, first I will drag the order date field to the columns area. This will give me the breakup of the numbers by years. Next, to filter my data for the consumer segment, I will drag the segment field into the filter area. This will give me a filter option at the top of the pivot table. Whichever value I will select in this, my data will be filtered for that segment. Another way to apply filters to the pivot table is via slicer. I will remove the segment field from the filter area, then right-click the segment field in the field list and select Add a Slicer. Now I can select any segment in the slicer and my pivot table will filter accordingly. The difference between a slicer and a filter is that filter will only impact a particular pivot table. Slicer, on the other hand, can be connected to multiple pivot tables at the same time. For example, I will create a copy of this pivot table. Now if I select any button on the slicer, both the pivot tables will get filtered. Let's say I want to disconnect the second pivot table from the slicer. I will select any cell within the pivot table, go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab and click on Filter Connections. This will show me a list of slicers to which my current pivot table is connected. I will uncheck the segment slicer. Now if I click on any segment in the slicer, the first pivot table will get impacted but not the second one. Pivot table is a very broad topic on its own, and it's difficult to cover each and every feature in this course. If you want to learn more about pivot tables, please check out my pivot table crash course where I've covered this topic in great detail. The link to the video should appear on the top right side, or if it doesn't, you will find it in the description. Sometimes your audience might want to see information in a more visual format rather than just simple tables. In that case, you can set up charts. In Excel, there are broadly two types of charts, pivot chart and the other one is the standard chart. Let me show you an example of a pivot chart. I will first set up a pivot table from this data set. I will put subcategory in the rows area and sales in the values area. Then I will select the data based on which I want to set up my chart. With the data selected, I will go to the Insert tab and under the Chart section, I will select the chart of my choice. And here you go, I have a pivot chart available now. Pivot charts are great because they allow interactivity with the data. For example, I can add the category field to the filter area and then I'll be able to filter my chart by any category that I want. However, they have very limited formatting options. The purpose of putting the chart in the first place is to improve the user experience by making our data visually more appealing, and therefore not having enough formatting options can be a deal breaker. Therefore, I usually use the standard charts in my work. The process of setting up a standard chart chart is similar. The only difference is that you need to bring the data outside of the pivot table to set up a standard chart. Therefore, I will use columns D and E as helper cells to bring the data out. I will link these cells to the pivot table, and then I will sort the pivot table in descending order. Now, with this data selected, I will go to the Insert tab and select a bar chart. Once you have set up a standard chart, the formatting options are unlimited. Let's say if I want to play around with the appearance of the bars, I will click on any of the bar, then press Ctrl 1 on my keyboard. This will open a formatting pane on the right. If I click on the first icon, here I can change the color and border of my bars. The second icon can help me add effects, for example shadow. And with the third one, I can adjust the gap width of my bars. Whenever you will select the chart, you will notice two additional tabs will become available on the ribbon, that is Chart Design and Format. Go to the Chart Design tab. Here you will find options related to chart layout, chart styles, and few others. Under the chart layout, the first option is to add a chart element. Here you can add, for example, a legend and specify the position of the legend. Next, you have the Quick Layout button, under which you will find some standard layout suggestions. Next section is the chart styles, where you have some preset styles. If you like any of them, you can click on it and your chart will adopt that selected style. Moving on, you have section for data. For example, if you want to change the data based on which your chart is made, you can do that here. And with the chart tab, you can switch from bar to, let's say, a line chart. On the Format tab, you have all the options here which we saw in the pane on the right earlier. There are a few additional options here, for example, the shape styles. These are a few other preset styles that you can select from. And on the right end of the Format tab, you have options to adjust the dimensions of your chart. Just like we saw in the formatting section, many customization options are also available for charts. They are quite straightforward, and I'll suggest you give it a try. Later in section 6, when we build a dashboard, we will do a lot of chart customization there. In this section, we will learn about working with shapes. Predominantly, you will use Excel for data analysis and calculations, but there will be times when you will need to deal with shapes as well. For example, if you're building a dashboard, you might have to use shapes to make your reports look better. To insert a shape, go to the Insert tab, select the shape of your choice, then click and drag your mouse anywhere on the worksheet, and that will give you a shape. Then select your shape, go to the Shape Format tab, and here you will find several formatting options. One of the difficult things about dealing with shapes is to align them. Let's say I have several shapes here and they are scattered around pretty badly. I want to bring them in one line. For that, I will select all the shapes, go to Shape Format tab, then under the Align button, I will select Align Middle. This should bring them in one line. Likewise, if I want to have even a space between all the shapes, then with all the shapes selected, I will go to the Align tab and select Distribute Evenly. Sometimes you might want to assign a dynamic value to your shapes. For example, later when we will build a dashboard, we will use shapes to set up these KPI cards. Let's say I want this shape to show the value of sales for furniture. I will select this shape, go to the formula bar, and give reference to the cell whose value I want to show in the shape. Now this box will always display the sales of furniture, and even when the value in the source cell changes, it will reflect in the shape as well. We will use this technique in more detail in the next section where we set up the dashboard. Finally, we have come to the fun part of the course. Here, we will consolidate everything we have learned so far to set up this modern and beautiful dashboard. On the front end, this dashboard has charts and visuals, but there are pivot tables behind the scenes that feed data into it. Therefore, as a first step, let's set up all the pivot tables that can feed the data. I will go to my source data, select the entire data, and set up a pivot table. First of all, let's arrange the data for the bar chart. The bar chart is showing sales by subcategory. Therefore, in the pivot table, I will put subcategory in the rows area and sales field in the values area. Next is our line chart, which shows sales by month and year. For that, I will copy the first pivot table, remove the subcategory field from the rows area, drag the order date field into the columns area, and drag another instance of order date field in the rows area. Next, we have a scatter plot that shows sales on x-axis and profit on y-axis. For this, I will copy the first pivot table and add the profit field to the values area in addition to the sales field. Then we have a pie chart which shows sales by ship mode. For this, I will create another copy of my first pivot table. Here, I will replace the subcategory field with the ship mode field. Moving on, we have 4 shapes showing sales, profit, quantity, and discount numbers. I will create another pivot table at the bottom showing these 4 values. As a next step, I will name all my pivot tables. Next, we have buttons on our dashboard which allow the user to filter information. These buttons are basically slicers, so we will set that up on our working sheet. Note that the segment slicer impacts all the visuals on our dashboard, whereas the year slicer impacts everything except for the line chart. Therefore, we will connect our segment slicers to all the pivot tables. And the year slicer will be connected to all the tables except for the table which contains data for the line chart. Next, let's start setting up our charts. First, I will bring the data outside of the pivot table. Note that in the bar chart, we need only top 10 categories arranged in the descending order of sales. To do that, I will filter the pivot table for top 10 items. Then with the data selected, I'll go to the Insert tab and add a bar chart. And then I will right click anywhere in the sales field and sort largest to smallest. Moving on, I will repeat the same process for line chart, scatter plot, and pie chart. For now, I will add the basic charts that come by default. Later on, we will format all of these charts in one go. Now I will add 4 shapes and link their values to each of the 4 measures we summarized in the bottommost pivot table. Next comes the fun part, and that is formatting. Note that I want to give all my elements a green color in the final dashboard. Applying this color to every chart one by one will be time consuming. A quick way to do this is to go to Page Layout tab, click on Colors, select the first color palette, and change the color of Accent 1 here. I will provide the hex code of the color I want to apply. Once we change the accent 1, all the elements in our workbook will get the color we gave for this accent. And also, the design ideas we will get now for the charts will be adopted to the color we had set up. I will select this design with a dark background, as this is how I want my final dashboard to be set up. I will apply the same chart design to all the other charts as well. Now I will repeat the same for shapes. In addition to applying a dark background style, I will also increase the font size and make it bold and centralize. On the line chart, I will make the 2017 line green and other years gray. This will pop out the latest year line a little bit. I will add data labels on the bar chart by right-clicking on any bar and selecting Add Data Labels. Now I do not need the y-axis labels, so I will eliminate them. All our elements are now ready and we just need to put them on the dashboard. I will set up a new worksheet and name it Dashboard. I will press Ctrl A to select all cells, then go to Home tab and give it a dark color. Next, I will go back to my working sheet, select my bar chart, press Ctrl X to cut it, and then come to the dashboard sheet and paste it by pressing Ctrl V. Then I will repeat the same for rest of the elements. Once I copied the shape, seems like they have lost reference to the correct cells. I will select each shape, then go to Formula bar, and right before the cell reference, I will mention the sheet name, which is sheet 13 in my case, followed by an exclamation mark. Next, I will bring the slicers in. With slicers, we do not have any default style that will match our dark theme. Therefore, we will need to create a new style. To do that, I will select any slicer, go to the slicer tab, and under the style section, right click on the current style and select duplicate. I will give it a name of custom slicer style. Then I will click on format and remove the borders. And under the fill tab, I will give it a dark color. Then I will click on OK. You will see that there will be no difference as of yet. This is because the new slicer style is created but has yet to be applied. To apply the new style, I will select both the slicers again, go to the slicer tab and select the new style we just created. Lastly, I will add a text box for our title and 4 more text boxes for each of the shapes. And our dashboard is ready. Let's check if it's working fine. I will click few buttons on the slicer to see if the data is filtering out properly. It looks great. In a real-world scenario, you might need to set up different kinds of reports and dashboards. The best way to get good at this is to practice as many projects as you can. I have another video where I take you through a process of building a dashboard in 5 simple steps. You can follow the link on the top right to check that video out. This will give you some more hands-on practice. With that, I hope you enjoyed this course. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.